Wait a second. Alright, anyway. Looks like that. Looks like she did get it. Okay. The answer is that we easily use our cognitive dissonance resolution to reframe the events to justify our actions. Alicia Esteve Head may not have been a true victim of 9/11, but what Tanya initially did was good for the survivors. Okay? Alicia could not have achieved this without becoming Tanya. Okay? The theology students were aware of the ill man, but it was more important for their calling to deliver a sermon that would have greater impact on more people. It's all too easy. Oh, I see. Okay. It's all too easy to reframe a story to protect the self-narrative from disentangling when presented with inconsistency. Why do we create these distortions? Isn't it better to be honest with oneself so that we do not only end up fooling ourselves? For one thing, positive illusions that we are better than most others. Positive illusions that we are better than most others may actually be beneficial to our mental well-being. These positive illusions ensure that our self-esteem is protected by downgrading our failings. Everybody cheats on their tax returns to over egging our positive attributes as being special. Unlike most people, I have a really creative mind. Armed with these positive illusions, we feel that we have more control over situations when in fact we have little or none. Remember how the illusion of control inoculates us from the stress of uncertainty? Positive illusions mean that we tend to see positive outcomes as a direct consequence of our actions, whereas negative outcomes are someone else's fault. This makes us unrealistically optimistic, given the trials and tribulations that life can throw at us. Positive illusions make us more resilient and willing to carry on. Maybe this resilience gave us a selective advantage as we evolved. Somewhere back in the mists of time, this way of thinking may have been the difference between the hunter on the Serengeti who was willing to keep trying that bit harder and the hunter who gave up the chase too early and failed to make it back to camp to mate. What do you mean he failed to make it back to camp? Didn't he give up on the hunt early? Did they kill him because he was empty-handed? I don't get it. Were they eating while they're on these hunting expeditions? That's why I don't understand. Somewhere back in the mists of time, this way of thinking, maybe this resilience gives us a selective advantage. Gave us a selective advantage as we evolved. Somewhere back in the mists of time, this way of thinking may have been the difference between the hunter on the Serengeti who was willing to keep trying that bit harder and the hunter who gave up the chase too early and failed to make it back to camp to mate. It is speculation, of course, but believing you will succeed means that sometimes you will, whereas believing that you will fail means that you inevitably do. That's right. That's right. Listen with mother. How funny. Listen with mother. When we describe ourselves to others, we refer to our past experiences by way of an explanation of who we are, how we have arrived, of who we are and how we have arrived at this point in our life. This seems like an objective exercise that we never really This seems such an objective exercise that we never really question the truthfulness of our storytelling. However, culture plays an influential role in how we interpret the world around us. It turns out that individualism that is so characteristic of Western thinking and the collectivism of the East shape our autobiographical memories as well. Chi Wong, a developmental psychologist at Cornell University, has shown that. Oh, that's way too big. Guys, these are all different sizes. I've been cutting off. Oh, this is a lot. It's probably too much. I've been using that brain. Ki Wong A developmental psychologist at Cornell University has shown that childhood memories differ between Eastern and Western cultures, with the greater the greater focus on the individual in the West when it comes to recounting past experiences. The self-obsessed Western perspective, I remember the time I won the class test, drives our thought processes to focus on an elaborate encoding of moment-to-moment personal events. This is why Western children recall more specific details compared to their Eastern counterparts. Those Eastern children who also had demonstrated greater detail for personal memories also scored higher on measures of individualism, thus proving that it was not the culture or language that determined autobiographical memory, but rather the way they viewed the world. The way children remember is partly aided by parents reminiscing with their children. As we learned earlier, we know that if parents talk over events with their young children, then the amnesia barrier that is typically reported in 2 to 3-year-olds can be pushed back much earlier. That's enough. This indicates that the framework of interpretation provided by the adults helps the child to make sense of his experience and form better memories. However, the studies have also shown that parents from the East and the West differ in the way they reminisce with adults and show the typical individualistic or collective frameworks when talking to their children about their memories. Should probably clean up, but I'm not going to. We got enough going on. What's more surprising is that the full content of memories is not always lost either. What's more surprising is that the full content of memories is not always lost either. What? But like it's still in there? I've heard humans say that. If you prime individuals from either the East or the West to think more individualistically or collectively, then they recall more personal or group-oriented memories accordingly. Okay. This means that the memories are still available. It is just that they are not usually retrieved, or sometimes. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Of course. Okay. But don't hate. Every single thing you've ever seen, done, said. It's all in there, and it's just about trying to tap into it. We only use 10% of our brains. Can you imagine if we could use 100% of our brains? The context in which we find ourselves even defines how we retrieve memories to describe our inner self. Memories that we know are selectively processed. As Sir Frederick Bartlett said, social organization gives a persistent framework into which all detailed recall must fit, and it very powerfully influences both the manner and the matter of recall. Even the memories we recall to define our self-story are defined by the groups to which we belong. Okay. Section. I mean, I'm a little bit distracted, so I'm not sure I'm going to miss something there. Anyway, continuing. Section. A flight from reality. For some individuals, their self-story is unacceptable. It's too much to cope with, so they seek to create a new self or at least lose the one they had. Take the case of Gene Saunders, who had been experiencing considerable difficulties in his home life and had a huge argument with his 18-year-old son, who called him a failure. Gene simply packed his bags and ended up 200 miles away in another town where he became Bert, a short-order cook who had no memory of his past experience. This kind of memory loss is known as a dissociative fugue state, from the Latin for flight. Fugue states typically emerge in early adulthood, and not very often after 50 years of age. They usually occur rapidly, but also end abruptly, and are thought to be a reaction to stress in which the individual ceases to acknowledge who he or she is. Listen with mother. He or she is. For example, Jeffrey Allen Ingram turned up at a television news conference in Denver in 2006 looking for his identity. All that he knew was that his name was Al. He asked the viewing audience, if anybody recognizes me, knows who I am, please let somebody know. Turns out that he had been on his way to visit a friend dying of cancer, but on arrival in Denver had gone into a fugue state. Eventually, his fiance's brother, who had watched the news, recognized Jeffrey, who lived over 1,000 miles away in Olympia, Washington. His own mother explained that this was not the first time Jeffrey had entered a fugue state. As a similar disappearance occurred in 1995 on trip to the grocery. Then he turned up 9 months later with no knowledge of who he was. Fugue states are just one of a number of conditions known as dissociative identity disorders, DIDs, formerly called multiple personalities, in which alternative selves or alter egos, quote unquote, are present. The first popular fictionalized account of DID was The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, 1886, by Robert Louis Stevenson. But the idea that an individual can fit into different personalities is a recurrent theme in modern culture. A notable recent example is Ed Norton's alter ego, Tyler Durden, played by Brad Pitt in Fight Club, 1999. Just like Jekyll and Hyde, we watched as the anarchic character of Tyler Durden increasingly drags Norton's upstanding character into criminality, only to discover at the end of the movie, spoiler alert, not sexy, is in fact his own alter ego. The notion that we all have a good and bad side has become accepted wisdom, although few of us would regard the different characterizations as different individuals. And yet, this is exactly the claim with DID, to the extent that it has been used in criminal cases as a defense plea. The first such case was in 1978 when 20-year-old Billy Milgram was arrested following an anonymous tip-off for rape of 4 college women on Ohio State campus the previous year. At first, he seemed like the typical drifter, troubled childhood, abused by his father, constantly in trouble. That changed after a psychological examination indicated he had at least 10 different personalities, 2 of whom were women. In fact, it was one of the women, Adelena, a 19-year-old lesbian, who claimed responsibility for the rapes. Another of Milligan's personalities was the fearful and abused child David, 9, who it was claimed made the telephone call turning in Billy. According to Time magazine, investigators found the police telephone number on a pad next to Milligan's phone. Milligan ended up being sentenced to 10 years in secure psychiatric hospitals and was released in 1988. Another famous case in which DID was used as defense was that of the Hillside Strangler, Ken Bianchi, who claimed that an alter ego, Stephen Walker, had been responsible. However, this defense fell apart when a dubious psychiatrist suggested that most cases of DID had at least 2 alter egos. However, this defense fell apart when a dubious psychiatrist suggested that most cases of DID had at least 2 alter egos. In the following hypnosis session, Bianchi conveniently manifested another alter ego, Billy. When police investigated further, they found out that Stephen Walker had been a real psychology student whose identity Bianchi had tried to steal in order to commit fraud. I see. When police investigated further, they found out that Stephen Walker had been a real psychology student whose identity Bianchi had tried to steal in order to commit fraud. Bianchi is currently serving a life sentence. Although DIDs are recognized in the major psychiatric manuals, they are still considered highly controversial. The first cases reported in the 19th century are linked to the psychoanalytic movement. Not much was heard of DID again until 1957 with the release of a popular movie, The Three Faces of Eve, about a woman with DID, followed by a similar movie, Sybil, in 1976. Prior to the 1970s, there had been very few cases of DID, but suddenly the incidence exploded, which led many to question whether it was a real medical disorder or a fashionable fad. Also, DID was primarily a North American problem, with few cases reported in other countries. Those that were reported in North America also tend to come from the same specialists, which casts doubt on the source of the disorder. Just like hypnosis and the actions of student prison guards, DID has been dismissed as an extremely elaborate example of role-playing, in which a belief about dissociated states is promoted by society and supported by a few influential experts, namely the psychiatrists who are experts in the field. This is not to say that individuals with DID are deliberately faking their symptoms. Support for this comes from studies that reveal that different brain states can be manifest when the individual is in one of his or her alternative personalities. For example, brain imaging studies have shown that patients with DID can manifest different patterns of brain activity when in different characters. In one patient, the memory region seemed to shut down during the transition between one personality to another, as if a different set of memories was being retrieved. The evidence from brain imaging studies is less convincing if one considers that we can alter our brain activity by simply thinking about different things. If I think about a time when I was upset or angry, my brain activity will change. However, one dramatic case in which brain science backs up the claim of true separated selves comes from a recent German DID patient who, after 15 years of being diagnosed as blind, gradually regained sight after undergoing psychotherapy. At first, only a few of the personalities regained vision, whereas others remained blind. Was the patient faking? Not according to the electrical measurements recorded from her cortex, one of the early sensory processing areas in the brain. When her personality was sighted, electrical activity was normal over this region, but absent when the patient was experiencing a blind personality. Somehow, the parts of her brain that were generating the multiple personalities were also shutting on and off the activity of the visual part of the brain. This finding is beyond belief. Literally. To believe that you are blind is one thing, but to switch off parts of the lower level functioning sensory processing areas of your own brain is astounding. Somehow, the network of connections that operates further upstream in the brain to deal with complex concepts such as the self and personality can control earlier basic processing input relay stations downstream in the brain. And it's not about consciousness, bro. Because they can't even talk about it. They don't even know that they're like doing that. Because otherwise they could just like be like, okay, all characters be cited. Section, How the Mighty Have Fallen. If we are not brain damaged or suffering from DID, to what extent can we experience a different self? Oh my gosh, I haven't been paying attention, so I have no idea. We probably can't, right? It probably doesn't happen all the fucking time. We just don't notice because of our confabulation. All right, sorry, let me ask the question again. If we are not brain damaged or suffering from DID, to what extent can we experience a different self? In modern westernized cultures, some people appear to lead complicated, multifaceted lives by juggling private and public personas, whereas others lead a more simple existence, such as subsistence farming in rural villages. The selves we present to the world must be a reflection of the different circles we inhabit. Sometimes those worlds can clash. Sometimes those worlds can clash. Yeah, sometimes those worlds can clash, which occurs when we discover a different side to individuals whom we thought we knew so well. The unfaithful spouse, the pedophile priest, the sadistic nurse, or the corrupt politician. These are the contradictions in the self that we see so often in others. Public figures seem to constantly fall from grace by engaging in activities that seem so out of character. Is there anything that the science of the self-illusion can do to cast some light on these transgressions? The first question to ask is why people put their public self-image unnecessarily at risk. The first question asks is why people put their public self-image unnecessarily at risk. For example, why do upstanding members of society have supposedly impeccable moral standards? For instance, why do upstanding members of society with supposedly impeccable moral standards often seem to get caught with their pants down? Why did Sir Alan Green, the former director of public prosecutions in the United Kingdom, go cruising around London's King's Cross station at the time? Why did Sir Alan Green, I'll ask you again, the former director of public prosecutions in the United Kingdom, go cruising around London's King's Cross station at the time a notorious hangout for prostitutes, when he must have known there was a good chance he could be arrested? Likewise, few could understand why Hollywood heartthrob Hugh Grant would pay Divine Brown, I hadn't heard about this, must have been just a kid, he must have already been recovering, would pay Divine Brown for sex in a car on Sunset Boulevard, a notorious night spot where the Vice Squad regularly operated. He must have known how risky were his actions. But maybe that's the whole point. There might be something thrilling and exciting about taking risks, and it is only a risk when you have something to lose. When called to account, many are at a loss to explain their actions and say they were not their usual self. Another fascinating facet of this type of behavior is sexual role-playing, in which people act out a very different sort of self from what they exhibit in their daily lives. For the most part, members of repressed societies have to maintain dignity and decorum, no more so than our leaders. For example, we have to be dominant, and yet how often do we hear about captains of industry or politicians engaging in submissive sexual fantasies where they pay to be dominated and subjected to humiliation? In 2010, 3 Long Island lawyers teamed up with a New York dominatrix to run a $50 million mortgage scam. Their victims were the many willing and wealthy clients who attended the dominatrix private dungeon in Manhattan, paying for bondage, discipline, sadism, and masochism. BDSM appears to be fairly common in the corridors of power. But why? For obvious reasons, getting people to talk about their sexual behavior is very difficult. Luckily, there are some who ask the sort of questions about sexual behaviors that the rest of us would shy away from. Catherine Morris, a psychologist from the United States, interviewed 460 heterosexual men who regularly engaged in BDSM. The majority of the men she interviewed were high-level professionals, including a fair number of corporate executives, including several chief executives of corporations. Her interviews also included psychiatrists, attorneys, engineers, scientists, and other professionals who spend a great deal of time in high-pressure intellectual pursuits on a daily basis. My intellectual pursuits aren't high pressure. Morris detected a pattern in which their emotions during these private BDSM sessions were ones that they did not feel they could express as part of their daily public lives. It was as if something was missing in their lives that needed addressing for total satisfaction. These men felt forced to reintegrate the missing components in privacy as part of a sexual ritual. Morris described how many of the high-level corporate executives felt that they were frauds, and that, in her view, humans seek balance between their public and private lives. It's kind of what you see on TV when you have a character like that. Big boss and, tell me I'm nothing. Yes, okay, sure. It is not only due to inadequate fulfillment that people seek out such role-playing. The practice of BDSM also allows the individual to lose his or her identity and adopt a role that he or she finds sexually gratifying by being someone else. For the most part, our sexual activities are private compared to our public behavior. It is almost as if we are allowed to become a different person in the bedroom. I don't understand that. I understand what was said. It just, I don't know. I feel I don't. It doesn't bother me, but I do. Anything I do in private, I'll do in public. I mean, with some embarrassment. I mean, I won't do it in public, but what I'm saying is, I don't know how to have. I don't have a feel like I have a private self. I feel like one and the same to me, my public and private selves, and that it just feels strange and foreign. It almost feels naughty, the idea that you would be different privately. Um, it is almost as if the cliche is the shy and demure wallflower in public who transforms into a sexual demon behind closed doors. It's as if the persona we portray in public is just a front for the real person private. But like, I kind of want to discover this private guy. Sometimes, I guess what I'm trying to say is, feels weird, but is there like stuff that I've never like admitted? Hey, look! Oh no, I moved it. There's a girl who wrote, Eris realized on this date, at this age, that he doesn't really know what his like sexual, like what his kinks are or something. Anyway, it's as if the persona we portray in public is just a front for the real person in private. No, it's as if he's gonna tell us, but no, really, those are kind of two yous, even more, depending on how we weave stories. Certainly, we are all expected to control our sexual behaviors in public, something that we are taught from a very early age. Those who cannot are regarded as perverts or mentally ill. In some societies, there are very strict codes of conduct, very often based on religion, but all societies have some rules about what sexual behaviors are permitted in public. Members of these societies must conform to these rules. And this must have something to do with it. If my mom, I remember one time when my mom picks me up from school, I get in the car, and you know how like normally your parent be like, "Oh, you have a crush on me," blah blah blah. So I get in the car, and I just been talking to this girl, Kathy Berkman, Barkman, and I said, I turned to my mom and I go, "Hey mom, you see that girl?" And my mom slaps me across the face, and one of my teeth, cut the inside of my cheek. And so it was quite embarrassing because Kathy would always make fun of me. Oh, hey, remember when you got in your mom's car and then all of a sudden you were bleeding from the mouth? And I remember that was the last time I ever tried to talk to my mom about anything, like sexual. That was not allowed. That was not allowed. I remember one time my dad said some woman this was like before I was dating, but he could tell I was interested. He said, "She's beautiful." And my mom buried him for 3 days with a breathing tube, and that could have something to do with my sexual repression. I don't know. The more they try to stop themselves. No. In some societies, they're very members of these societies must conform to these rules, but ultimately, one consequence is to suppress thoughts and behaviors that do not go away, but may eventually need to be vented. Like those patients with Tourette's syndrome who lack the ability to suppress screaming profanities. The more they try to stop themselves, the stronger the compulsion becomes. This is the ego depletion effect again. The illusion is that we have the self-control to decide whether we give in. The illusion is that we have the self-control to decide whether we give in to our urges or not. Just a complete misunderstanding of what a mind is. The problem is that abstinence may lead to pent-up frustration to do exactly the things we are trying to avoid. That's why the mighty fall down in such a spectacular way. Technology may provide us with a way out. One place where we may be able to play out these fantasies and urges without exposure is on the internet. The next chapter considers how the internet is changing how we interact and share stories, and ultimately, how the web is going to play a major role in the self-illusion we construct. Uh-huh. That's still, I guess, coming. But it does feel dated when you read like the next text of how the internet is changing how we interact and share stories. But anyway, and ultimately, how the web is going to play a major role in the self-illusion we construct. This is because storytelling on the internet flows in two directions, with everyone having the ability to contribute to receiving, generating, and sending information to others. I'm trying not to touch my chest right now. I don't know. But now the more I resist, if our looking glass self is a reflection of those with whom we surround ourselves, then there are inevitably going to be implications for our self-illusion in the way new media change, open up, or restrict the others with whom we come into contact. And then the next chapter is chapter 8, Caught in the Web. I think we've had enough fun for today. I had a bee or something. Fucking. Anyway, Echo 24 Fox, Echo 25 Foxtrot. Chris Niebauer and Bruce Hood. Here's my question. Both of you talked about the self as an illusion. You talked about sort of why it's so strong. What do we tell people? Because your whole book, I've told people. All the experiments. But you know that facts don't matter. Facts can matter if people realize that facts don't matter to them. Then I can make them matter, but they think facts matter. And then you tell them the facts and they are unswayed. Well, what do we say to them? I hope by the end of the book they'll tell me. $2024 Eckberg 26 Goldie. All right, so we've got plenty of work to do. And maybe by talking, interacting with you, being stimulated from the reading, drinking this coffee, we're going to wake up and get into it. It's Echo 26 Golf 1216. Been waking up pretty late lately, and guess what? Father is coming tomorrow. All right. I hope that the book that we're going to be listening to on our drives isn't going to be too triggering. I mean, I could not. Hold on, let me put you somewhere else. I could not read or listen to No Self, No Problem. But I want to make progress on that. We're reading this other self book, The Self-Illusion, How the Social Brain Creates Identity by Bruce Hood. And it's been pretty cool to see them both talk about categories and our assignments of identity from others and confabulation and the narratives that we come up with according to this categorical kind of thinking. So, but it does feel like one version of the story is that I'd just be trying to provoke him. Um, but I think he's the one. I don't know whether he's the one that bought this book. I don't know. Okay, let's just get into it. Okay, so we're reading The Self-Illusion, How the Social Brain Creates Identity by Bruce Hood, written in 2012. We're in chapter 8, Caught in the Web. All right, let's go. It started with a man shouting in the crowd. Why was he shouting? Did someone say, bomb? No one was certain, but no one stuck around to check. Within seconds, there was a mass stampede. It was the Second World War Remembrance Ceremony in Amsterdam in May 2010. One witness reported, just after the moment of silence, a very loud shriek could be heard not that far away from where I was standing. Immediately, a huge amount of people started to move away from where the sound had come from. It was scary when this mass of people attempted to run away from the shout. This is an example of stampeding, a common phenomenon found among animals that live in groups. It occurs whenever something triggers a sudden movement of a small number that causes the whole to respond en masse. This is the herd mentality, the hive mind. When someone in a crowd, this is the herd mentality, the hive mind. When someone in a crowd starts to run, we instinctively follow. In the same way, we tend automatically to copy and mimic others. This makes a lot of sense. Like meerkats, we can benefit from the collective wisdom and awareness of others when some threat arises. Because we instinctively respond to other humans, a simple action in one individual can rapidly spread and escalate to complex group activity. The problems occur when large numbers gather in limited spaces and the threat is disproportionate to the danger of the moving crowd. Over 60 people were injured in the Amsterdam stampede, but they were lucky. Each year, hundreds of people are killed when large crowds gather in confined spaces and panic breaks out. It is in our nature to assemble in groups. Many of us seek out crowds and groups to satisfy a deep need to belong. In doing so, we cluster with like-minded individuals who share common interests. This is why most stampedes occur at religious festivals and sporting events. This is because we substantiate ourself in the crowd. Sometimes others feel their individual self is lost in the crowd as they become one with the others around. Whether we feel lost or found, our self is ultimately influenced by the collective properties of the groups we join. As soon as we join others, our self is reflected in the crowd. This relationship between the individual and the crowd is a key interest in the field of social networking, in which scientists try to understand the nature of groups in terms of how they form, how they operate, how they change, and how they influence the individual. Some of the most dramatic examples are the riots that periodically erupt in otherwise civilized societies. In 2011, the police shooting of a black man set a London mob burning and smashing their way through the Capitol. Although the killing was in London, copycat rioting broke out in other English cities. Commentators were quick to look for culprit causes: social class, education, ethnic group, poor parenting. Sounds like good parenting to me. Unemployment, boredom. What about moral compulsion? And so on. When they started to look at the profiles of those arrested in the London disturbances, however, it soon became apparent that there was not just one type of rioter, but a variety from different backgrounds, ages, and opportunities. Many were disaffected youths from deprived backgrounds, but there was an Oxford law graduate, a primary school teacher, an organic chef, children of a pastor, and other unlikely criminals, his quotes. In attempting to categorize the typical looter, the authorities had failed to understand that coherent groups emerge out of very different individuals. It doesn't even have to be a perceived miscarriage of justice that triggers riots. As witnessed in London or the 1992 Los Angeles riots after the police beating of Rodney King. It doesn't have to be a perceived miscarriage of justice that triggers riots, as witnessed in London or the 1992 Los Angeles riots after the police beating of Rodney King. In 2011, another riot exploded in Vancouver in response to the outcome of the Stanley Cup ice hockey final. When the Canucks lost to the Boston Bruins, it sparked a flurry of rioting and looting. Canadians take their ice hockey very seriously. Harvard's Nicholas Christakis, I feel like I've heard that name before, and it's not pronounced that way, says that when you take a bird's eye view of humans through the prism of social networks, the picture of both the individual and the group changes. He draws the analogy with graphite and diamonds. Both minerals are made of carbon atoms, but it is the way these individual atoms are connected that determines why one material is soft and dark and the other is hard and clear. The layered lattice arrangement of graphite carbon atoms means that it shears easily, whereas the highly interconnected arrangement of diamond carbon atoms means that it is hard as, well, diamonds, of course. Therefore, when it comes to carbon atoms, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Similarly, understanding, well, yeah, because, well, it's not. It's the sum of its parts plus the sum of its connections, its bonds between the parts. Anyway. Therefore, when it comes to carbon atoms, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Similarly, well, I guess that's what that expression means, huh? Similarly, understanding the individual self only, but sometimes it's used to be like, oh, so there's something extra there. Yeah, the bonds. It doesn't have to be magic. Similarly, understanding the individual self only really makes sense in terms of the groups to which they are connected. To extend the carbon metaphor, maybe scratch what I just said. I don't want you to be distracted if you think that was wrong. Maybe it was. So I'm just going to start again from, therefore, when it comes to carbon atoms, the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Similarly, understanding the individual self only really makes sense in terms of the groups to which they are connected. To extend the carbon metaphor, when we are well connected, we are more resilient because there is safety and strength in numbers. Alone, we are more vulnerable and weaker. The mechanisms for joining groups are not completely random. We all possess individual differences that mean we join some groups and not others. There are strong historical, geographic, and physical factors at play. We tend to form relationships and associate with others who represent our culture, live close by, resemble us, and with whom we can easily connect. We also form friendships with those who share the same interests and worldviews. We tend to like those who resemble us physically. For example, obese people are more likely to hang out with other obese people and the friends of obese people. If one friend is overweight, there's a 45% increased likelihood above chance that the other friend will also be overweight. If you're the friend of a friend who has another overweight buddy, then your likelihood is going to be 25% above chance. This is known as, I want to know how this is pronounced. Homophily, liking the same. Oh, this is a tablet. Look at that. How do I just select that without the hyphen? Doesn't matter. Well, I can't. It's looking up the hyphen too. How do you pronounce it though? How do you pronounce it? I don't see a pronunciation. All right. Well, I'm downloading the English dictionary. Just 2 seconds. Hold on. How do you pronounce it, bro? All right, dictionary.com. Homophily. Homophily. That seems stupid. Homophily. Okay. Let's go, bro. Homophily. Oh, homophily. Okay, that's okay. Homophily. All right. This is all right. So 45%. If one friend is overweight, there's a 45% increase likely above chance that the other friend will also be overweight. And then if it's a friend of a friend, 25%. This is known as homophily, the tendency for birds of a feather to flock together, for like to be attracted to like. Only by the time the relationship is a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of, hold on, let me do it the exact number of times. Only by the time the relationship is a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend has the link to obesity disappeared. Homophily can arise for various reasons, such as shared external environments or interests. Groups formed on the basis of national identity, religious beliefs, homophily. Religious beliefs, team allegiances, or musical tastes are examples of homophilic. No, that's got to be homophilic. Homophilic? No.
Homophilic.
Okay.
Homophilic.
Groups formed on the basis of
Homophilic.
Groups formed on the basis of
Homophilic. Homophilic.
Groups formed on the basis of national identity, religious beliefs, team allegiances, or musical tastes are examples of homophilic groups resulting from external factors. There is nothing genetic about being British, Christian, Manchester United supporter who likes Dolly Parton. Oh, there is nothing genetic about being a British, Christian, Manchester United supporter who likes Dolly Parton. No, but I could maybe guess about certain, predispositions that you had based on that. All right. More surprising, however, is the recent discovery of genetic factors in homophily in social groupings. It has long been known that good-looking people It has long been known that good-looking people tend to hang out with each other, and that looks are partly genetic. But a recent study by Christakis
Con Revolut Business gestiono mis finanzas fácilmente. Puedo enviar dinero a todo el mundo rápidamente y a buen precio.
Pronouncenames.com. Christakis.
Christakis, but I don't know how you pronounce it. I don't know. All right. It has long been known that good-looking people tend to hang out with each other, and that looks are partly genetic. But a recent study by Christakis and colleagues has shown that genes associated with behavioral traits are also related to friendship formation. For example, one gene, DRD2, must be the D2 dopamine receptor, associated with the disposition to alcoholism, was found to predict homophily in clusters of friends, whereas another, CYP2A6, no idea what that could be. Let's first look up DRD2. Yeah, dopamine D2 receptor. Now, what the hell is CYP2A6? Do we have any guesses? CYP. C. Cortisol? Cortisol yonder in the periphery? What the fuck is CYP? So, all right. For example, one gene, DRD2, associated with the disposition to alcoholism. By the way, I'm on 2 weeks without a drink. I told my mom, doesn't this prove that, I mean, except for like a couple of beers when I saw a friend, but literally 2 beers. And then the next day, 1 beer. A 2% beer, so